All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, if that's okay with everyone.
Yep.
All right.
And if anyone has
You-
questions along the way, please put them in the chat or just raise your hand or jump in.
Okay, let me hide this panel. Um, so, wherever you are, whether it's morning, evening, I hope that I can keep you awake and keep you interested in this topic. When David asked me about doing this, I was really excited, and then I thought about who the guest list would be, and then I thought, oh my God, okay, no pressure. And I know that like Marie Claire, having listened to you talk about restorative practices and how it influenced your work, and so I hope that you can join in as we talk about this. And Lee, I know that you know a lot about restorative practices as well, so I hope that you jump in as well. A little bit about me. I started my career in private practice, working mostly with children and adolescents and their families. And about 15 years ago, I got the opportunity to work in an independent school, which is like being a private practice counselor in a school. And I remember sitting around with students and thinking, I had my coffee cup in hand and, just being around with kids and thinking, they're going to pay me for this? Like, this is great. I didn't know this kind of job existed. That was when I was still in the honeymoon period, because of course it doesn't last like that all the time. But I still, 15 years later, I still have to pinch myself because this has been a wonderful experience. But it's because of working in a school that I met David and Lee and started to take this deep dive into self-determination theory. And about 10 years ago, when a couple of our students were dismissed because of a zero tolerance policy, I thought to myself, I just don't feel good about that. I want something that will keep our students within the community, not, I want a very restorative practice thing is to separate the deed from the doer. I want to make sure that we are giving kids what they need in regards to discipline, but also keeping them in our community. And so I did my research and I looked at restorative practice. And the entire time that I was doing the training, I kept on writing in the margins of the books, reflecting back to how this practice works really well in meeting the psychological needs of autonomy. And this practice works, that would be great for relatedness. And it just seemed to really align. And it kept on doing that and kept on doing that. And I thought, this is a good fit for me. It's a good fit for our school. And I decided to become a trainer. I just fell right into it all. Drank the Kool-Aid, I think they say. But even though like our school's practices have sort of ebbed, like as far as like the consistency of doing things in the restorative practice model, it has still remained very foundational to our philosophy of discipline. And so like I am happy to share this with you, and we're going to do a quick overview of restorative practices. I'm going to focus in on three that I believe are that highlight the psychological needs. And then as I'm sharing those with you, I'm gonna share how I've used those practices within the school. So that's the RP in action. And please ask questions at any time, but we will have time for questions at the end. Everybody ready for me to go on? Okay. All right. Oh, maybe. Okay. So restorative practices are pretty expansive, but there are a few things that I really want to make sure that are pointed out in the beginning. One thing is that having defined protocols and consistent terminology really do provide alignment and reduce the variability in how we support students and how we provide discipline. And like self-determination theory, restorative practices are really rooted in research, and they are backed by neuroscience and psychology that find that, punishment-based systems often trigger a threat response, which is exactly what you do not want when you're trying to resolve conflict. So restorative practices focus on emotion regulation and empathy building. And we know through some recent research, at least recent research that I've found, that there is that correlation between empathy and intrinsic motivation. Also, although that restorative practices sort of have this association with conflict resolution, they are very proactive, and it is that proactive investment in community that reduces the frequency and the intensity of behavior problems. But when things happen, those responsive processes, because there have been that proactive focus, the responsive processes are much more effective and we can get to them quickly. And the restoration back into the community is quick. Let me find my arrow. Okay. So I want to start first with a focus on restorative circles. Restorative circles can be, at one end of the continuum, very proactive, and at the other end of the continuum, very restorative and responsive. And so let's start with the proactive circles, which have really been a game changer in our advisory program here, especially for our teachers who may feel that they are SEL challenged, that they feel like they don't have the skill set to teach an SEL lesson. A proactive circle is right up their alley. It's really easy. It's like effective in building community and encouraging voice. Students get to choose the topics of discussion, and that encourages not only high participation, but because of the structure and the consistency of the circles, kids feel safe in participating. And so it's that regular opportunity to share and listen and connect with each other, face to face, eye to eye. It's a circle. So just that structure builds that community. And I think I read somewhere that the idea of circles started with just around a campfire, that we've always sort of been, whenever we're in circles, we build community. Now, at the other end of the continuum is the restorative conference, which is a very formal process. It's so formal that it is scripted, that there's preparation involved in it. There's the dialogue is set, but it ends with the sharing of food. And it's intentional in that way. And I want to share with you a restorative conference that we had here at school about 4.5 years ago. And yes, it has been 4.5 years since my last restorative conference. But 4.5 years ago, there was a young man who was listening to some music during a break, and it was rap music. And the lyrics in the song that he was listening to had some offensive words and some racial slurs. And there was a young woman that was around, and she went over to this kid and said, "Hey, can you please stop? I just want to tell you that that is offensive to me, and this is why." She actually took that time. She was an older student, actually took that time. So he agreed to stop saying the word in the song, but he continued to play the music. And whenever he heard that, he increased the volume at just that time, which, intentionally disrespectful, not okay in our community. And this student, who was older, went to her advisor. And so this went to the disciplinary committee. There was a consequence that was delivered. It was an out-of-school suspension which I'm not sure how you feel about that. In our community, that's a pretty egregious behavior, and so out of school was reflective of that. And after he served his suspension, the restorative conference was made available to both him and to the girl that was harmed. So the person responsible and the person who was harmed have an opportunity to come together and repair their relationship. So it was offered to them. They can choose not to participate in this conference. There's nothing that changes if they participate in the conference other than that they get to rebuild their relationship. There's no removal of consequences. There's nothing like that. The consequence has already been served. But coming back into the community is really important. And so this conference was accepted by both parties. And the preparation for a restorative conference lies in meeting with each of the people who are going to be taking part of it and reflecting on specific questions. Remember, it's very scripted. So I'm going to share with you the questions that I posed for the young man who was responsible. 5 simple questions. I asked him, what happened? And then he was able to really reflect on that. Bear with me. So we do this together. What were you thinking of at the time? What have you thought about since? Who has been affected by what you have done, and in what way? And what do you think you need to do to make things right? So those were the questions that we sat with for a while, that he really thought about. And again, it was his decision to be part of this conference. And really, like, if you're going to be part of the conference, you're all in. And so he took those questions, we talked about them, and then he had some time to really think them through. Now, my work with the young woman who was harmed, she also got some questions, but hers were a little different. Hers were, what did you think when you realized what had happened? What impact has this incident had on you and others? What has been the hardest thing for you? And then, just like the young man's, what do you think needs to happen to make things right? So they each had to think about what's it going to take to feel like this is on the right path, right? So that there's been some restoration. What needs to happen? And so they went away with these questions, had some time to think, and then coming back together in the restorative conference, again, very formal. Parents are invited to these conferences. Students are allowed to choose an adult at school that might be like their trusted adult. And again, very formal. Everybody has an opportunity to speak. And the outcome of this, where both of them shared what it would take for them to feel like this was, right. The young man said that, he really wanted to apologize to her face, to make sure that she understood. He was glad that he had the opportunity. But one thing that she asked of him was that he get some education about what that meant when he was singing along with those words out loud in, a common area, and how that, impacts people of color when he does that. And so, this contract is written up, it is signed, and the students follow through with it. And so part of what he had to do was meet with our director of inclusion and belonging to talk about that. But also, part of the contract was that they would have lunch together once a week for the rest of the semester, so that they could get to know each other a little bit better. And so in that way, it really focused on restoring that relationship and rebuilding their trust in each other. It was kind of beautiful. So those 2 circles on either end of the continuum, they really do have complementary roles. One of them, the proactive circles, really builds the relationships. And the other, the restorative conferences, really like repairs them by like promoting responsibility and growth. So I wanted to stop and see if anybody had any questions about that or any thoughts. But I'm a counselor, so I'm good with silence.
If anybody has questions, pop them into the chat or just raise your hand.
Okay, I'm going to move forward. The next one I want to talk with you about is fair process. Fair process really does ensure that everybody has a voice. It helps to shape outcomes when there's something that needs some consideration, whether it is a conflict or whether there's some decisions that need to be made. People, when they are involved in fair process, they feel respected, like they're not just subject to the rules, that they had some input and some agency in those rules. And it fosters some ownership. And when you have some ownership in something, you are more motivated to abide by whatever the outcome is. Now, in fair process, we talk about the 3 E's, which essentially are just engaging in conversation and engaging in that dialogue, bringing your ideas into the discussion. But then once a decision is made, coming back to the constituents who brought this to you and making sure that they understand the why behind the decision. Why was that decision made? Again, creating this feedback loop that really does help deepen the understanding of like the whole process. And then finally, there has to be clear expectations about behavior and about the consequences if somebody does not follow through with the behavior. So an example of this is actually pretty recent. We use fair process. This is a regular. This is something that I would say remains pretty consistent with how we do things here at GDS. We like to involve students in our thinking. We like for students to have like their own agency whenever possible. And so fair process is a huge part of that. Most recently, like many schools, we've been struggling with cell phones and what our cell phone policy is going to be. I'm not sure how it is across the globe, but here in the States, it is what is on every educator's mind in high schools. But so knowing that in the end, we were going to end up with a no phone policy for the school day. We knew that from 8:15 until 3:15 in the afternoon, we were not going to have cell phones. But we also knew that just coming out with that and saying that, first, we were going to miss some really important things that, I mean, we're pretty smart people, but we don't know it all. We were not going to have the buy-in that we need. And fair process really does create that buy-in, right? That's what it is. It's about buy-in. And so we wanted to think about, so how do we get that? So we decided to have focus groups. We engaged teachers, we engaged students, and we engaged parents. Those were our constituents. And each group was asked only 2 questions, and you would not believe the amount of conversation and dialogue that came through with just those 3 questions. But 2 questions. It was, how does our current cell phone policy affect your, and it was different for the students and the parents and the teachers, but it was basically about your ability to focus, your ability to get stuff done, connect with others during the school day. And then the other thing is, what are your concerns about a no phone policy during the school day? That's the what are we not thinking about? What is on somebody else's mind that we need to take into consideration? And so we spent that time. We took in all the info. We culled it. We went through it all, and it really did help to shape our outcome. Because of that process, we realized that we needed to provide some landlines so that students would be able to reach out to their parents and ask to make sure that they bring sports equipment for afternoon, or I forgot my lunch and I really don't like what's at the cafeteria. Can you drop something off for me? Things like that. We also realized that, having kids leave their phones in their car might not be the best idea. Maybe what we need to do is find a way to collect them. And if we collect them, how do we do that? So all of that was gained through fair process. We were able to come through with a very detailed policy, but people who were part of the process will see that what they contributed is part of our policy. And whether or not they wanted a no phone during the school day policy, they can see at least that they were heard and that they have some agency in the decision that was made. And the central idea of fair process is this: that people are more likely to trust and cooperate freely with systems, whether they themselves win or lose by those systems, when there's fair process. So even though I don't get what I want, I still contributed to it. So I'm going to stop here and see if there's any burning questions.
Bridge, I'm
Yeah.
curious, after the policy was articulated, were there people who maybe weren't part of the focus groups that raised real concern or anger about it?
If there were, I don't know about it. There could have
Good.
been, and I'm just not aware of it. The way that we got our constituent groups together was through this weekly email that goes out called our paw prints. And if you'd like to be part of a group that is, and so they had the opportunity, even if they didn't take us up on it.
So a pretty open selection process.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah. Trying to make sure that people knew it was coming, that there is going to be a no phone policy, right? Or a phone policy, I guess. And in that, being able to kind of go ahead and get the waters ready, I guess.
Bridget, how often do you engage in this fair process procedure? Over how many issues, or how frequent is it? Is it at classroom levels, at school level? To what extent are you using it?
That's a great question. I actually use it pretty regularly in my class. I teach two different classes, as well as this, counseling gig I have. I teach an AP Psych class, and I teach a wellness class for a freshman. And I use it more in my work with freshmen because there's a little bit more movement that I'm allowed in that than in an AP class. But it could be on whether or not the test is going to be online, or a written or an essay. Like I allow kids to be part of the decision making when it comes to like some of those low stakes decisions. Our student council is part of our regular decision making when it comes to just whether it's about the cafeteria, or about how we structure our open campus periods, which probably sound like mumbo jumbo to a lot of you, but that's like just free time for kids. So in that way, like, student council reaches out to their grade levels, gets information about, how they would like to, and then they are part of the process of figuring out how we're going to spend that time. We might know that there are certain things that are off limits, but we're going to hear that from kids. We're going to allow them that, and then be able to come back to them with the why we can't do that. So as much as possible, we engage fair process, I guess is the best answer I can give you. But I know whether teachers know it or not, they are using fair process in their classrooms. They might forget that it's called fair process, but they're doing it.
It's part of your culture, from what I understand, at this point. Laura put a
Right.
comment in the chat that I wanted to share. Teachers often feel left out of key school decisions by administrators. Yes, and it can hurt morale. And we often forget that students can feel this way too, and their voices are just as important in setting climate and culture. Fully agree with that.
Absolutely. And sometimes, depending on what's happening in your school, you might want to focus more on that student voice and making sure that students are part of a process, because they're, depending on what's happening in your school. Right now, I feel like, and sometimes I will say that there is too much of a focus on student voice. And I think that's not necessarily healthy, that we need to bring it back to, okay, so adults are in charge here, but we do want to hear, right? We want your voice, but, we need to make sure that, like, you're not running the school, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I see a question.
Yeah, I had a
Sorry.
question. Sorry about my video. The camera's not working right now. I'm a little bit conflicted with the decision on the student that you talked about before with the rap music and playing the music of the decision that was made to suspend the student as opposed to perhaps maybe looking for more alternatives in terms of how could we make this a learning experience in addition to the restorative practice. So I'm wondering, A, whether or not how and why that decision was made and who made it, and whether or not there was any resistance to that by anybody, and whether or not that would have made a difference.
If there was resistance to it, if it would have made a difference?
Was there resistance to it? And if there was, could that have made a difference in terms of maybe rescinding the decision to suspend the student? But more so in terms of how and why that decision was made to suspend the student.
The racial slur was a significant one. And it was intentional and disrespectful. And so that's why the decision was made for the suspension. Knowing that the opportunity for the restorative conference would allow for the education piece, would hopefully allow for the education piece, I guess was the I don't want to say the compromise, but the decision about the suspension was pretty, that is what it is when it's an intentional act of harm toward a person because of their identity.
Mm-hmm.
One of
And
the
who
things,
who made the decision?
Oh, administration.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that's tricky, and I experienced this when I introduced restorative practices at the school where I was working, teachers pushed back because their belief was that there would be no consequences. And sometimes in order to get to the place where you can do the restorative part, which is really the most important part in my humble opinion, we had to reassure them that kids weren't just quote unquote getting away with things.
Right.
It's a process, and to build a fully restorative, trauma informed school, if you will, it takes years, and it takes a coordination from administration and teachers and the people who do the restorative work. It's complicated. Bridge, I think you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. So now, oops. Oh no, I gave it away. I want you to play along with me for something.
Mhm.
All right. I want you to think about the person who had the greatest impact on your development of who you are right now. Just think in your mind. Think about that person that you respected most as you were becoming who you are.
Hmm.
Think about what allowed you to feel that way. And if you can, come up with one word that describes that person. Who'd like to share?
Yeah. You can unmute yourself and speak, or you can put it in the chat. Supportive, cheerleader, fair, integrity.
Great ones.
Authentic. Genuine. Patient.
That's great.
Friend with authority. Interesting. It's
Okay.
nice when we have these words assigned to people who influence us.
Yes. So the social discipline window, I'm going to show it to you. You've already seen it. It's not going to be as impactful as I had hoped it would be. It's this visual tool for describing or for helping people understand exactly what you just described. That person who held you to high standards, yet provided you with the support that you needed to get there. We use this for professional development to focus on these two different things of challenge and support. And when you put these two things on these axes, what you find is you come up with these four very distinct ways of working with people. And it's easier if this is part of your language, and we do this. This is a regular professional development that we maintain. So this is part of our restorative practices that has really held true. I still work with new faculty to talk about the social discipline window and how understanding the social discipline window can help them in their classrooms. Thinking about how faculty can consider how to structure their classrooms to be autonomy supportive, which we like to call the warm demander. That just the right amount of challenge and support. So if you think about a person who is high on challenge and low on support, you can see that it's up there in that quadrant, the 2 quadrant, right? That's a teacher whose classroom tends to be more punitive. A teacher or a classroom that is high in support and low in challenge is a pretty permissive classroom. That might be a teacher who doesn't let their kids struggle with a challenge. They do it for them. They do the work there for them. They show them how to fix the math problem without letting the kids struggle with it for a little bit. Being low on challenge and low on support is what I call the substitute classroom. It's where there's the substitute teacher in there that's really not doing anything other than babysitting. But unfortunately, there are teachers who sometimes do that. Not at our school, of course, but sometimes there are teachers who don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to what's going on in their classroom. But what we want is right up here, that with classroom. And that's the language that we use, with. High in challenge and high in support. Having high expectations for your kiddos, but also knowing that with high expectations, they need you in order to help them along. And because we use this so often in our faculty meetings and in our professional development, in our onboarding, this is part of our onboarding, this language is really useful for teachers. One of the things that we do every semester, our teachers send out a classroom climate survey, and students are encouraged to share how they feel in their teachers' classrooms, not about the content, but the feeling in the classroom. And so when teachers get this information back, it is shared with them from their administrator, and they can see areas for growth. And there have been times when an administrator has requested that I work with a teacher, and using this model, this tool has been so helpful, because there is a teacher who I most recently worked with who, such a great content teacher, really knows her stuff, knows how to teach it. But when kids struggle or they have a question, she's really not accessible. Some of her feedback was that she rolls her eyes if somebody asks for help, or I know, I see your face, Lee, rolls her eyes or says, "What? You don't understand that?" Or there's lots of different ways that she responds, that when kids hear that, they're not going to continue to reach out to her for help. And so using this to help her see that she's got high challenge, right? She is really good at teaching her content and having high expectations from her kids, but she is low in support. And when she can see that her kids experience her classroom as punitive, that's what their experience is, no teacher wants that. No teacher wants their kids to feel like they're being punished when they walk into the room. And so this provides her with a way to, okay, I got to up my support. I've got to stop rolling my eyes. Yeah. Lee.
Well, and Laura jumped in and said that she's thwarting risk taking, which is absolutely true.
I'm sorry, say that
nobody
again?
wants she's thwarting risk taking. That's what
Absolutely.
Laura added in the chat. Yeah.
Absolutely. But what we want teachers to do is be with, and so that's our the counseling team. Our motto is I'm with you, and that's what we want teachers to say to our students is, I'm with you. What do you need for me to be with you? How can I help be with you? It's that language that when kids hear that my teacher is with me, it sets them up differently. So this idea of the social discipline window, it really does identify that high challenge and high support brings us exactly what we need for kids to be accountable with guidance, right? Accountability with guidance. Help them build some problem-solving skills. Help them with their confidence and their ability to meet challenges. We don't want kids running away from challenges. We want them feeling like they are capable and that they are competent. So it's a simple framework that describes what works. So this, the author of this saying, Ted Wachtel, who is the founder of the International Institute of Restorative Practices, human beings are happier, more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. And when you read that, hopefully you're like me, and you are making notes in the margins of all the ways that fundamental hypothesis of restorative practices hits the mark on the psychological needs of our students.